Chapter 21. At 5 minutes to 7 that night, I was sitting in a booth at Forlini's on Baxter Street, gnawing on the celery stalk from my drink, my eyes watering from the extra Tabasco and horseradish. I was foregoing my customary beer. The only Italian food it goes with is pizza, and they don't serve pizza at Forlini's, which is a unique and venerable New York institution, an Italian restaurant in Chinatown, where at one table you can find the guy who just requested a wiretap authorization from a federal judge. At the next table you can find the judge, and at the table next to that you'll find the target. It is elegant, the food is great, and it is neutral ground. The last time I was in Forlini's, we were celebrating 3 promotions. Vernon Calderwood, the former U.S. trustee for the Southern District of New York, had been appointed to the federal bench. Sheldon Stern, the former assistant trustee, had been appointed to fill Calderwood's spot, and my friend Nick had moved up from a staff position to fill Sheldon's shoes. It was one of those evenings where old friends tell the kind of war stories that get funnier with age and alcohol consumption. Late in the evening, the newly robed Judge Calderwood hauled himself up to his full and impressive height and raised the most recent of many glasses of scotch even higher. He was a man who stood out in any circumstance, but even more so now, as the only black man in the restaurant. "Excuse me," Judge Calderwood's booming bass preacher's voice cut through the noise of the crowd. "Can I have everyone's attention?" He got it, and not just from our table. The whole restaurant went silent at the sight of him. "I want to congratulate my former colleagues in the Justice Department, Mr. Stern and Mr. Kalachi. Your promotions are well deserved, if only because you have always followed my instructions to the letter. Now that I'm gone, you're going to have to muster the strength and imagination to go it alone. And don't think that our former association is going to make things any easier on you when you come across the street. Having taught you everything I know will only serve to make me harder on you." There was generous laughter. We were drunk, and he was a federal judge. "In closing," he continued, "I would like to point out that today's proceedings prove, beyond the shadow of a doubt, that out of Jews," he nodded at Sheldon, "Catholics," a nod to Nick, "and Southern Baptists," a hand on his own chest, "God loves Southern Baptists the most." If a pin had dropped in the ensuing silence, it would have sounded like a gunshot. The moment broke with much laughter at our table and hard stares from many of the other patrons. As he sat, I saw Judge Calderwood scan the room, catching the eye of a few of the other diners. I couldn't help thinking that he had been making a serious point, and not to those of us who thought we were his audience. My reverie was interrupted when Nick appeared at my table with a man in jeans, engineer boots, and a dirty Harley-Davidson t-shirt under a black leather jacket. The stranger had flat eyes and curly black hair streaked with gray and sported a soul patch. God, how I hate those things on white guys. I don't even like them on black guys unless they're jazz musicians. Nick dropped into the booth opposite me, sliding his solid form across the red leather to make room for his friend. He flagged the waiter. "I'll have what he's having," he said, pointing at my drink. "I don't think you want one of these," I said, holding it up. "It doesn't have any alcohol." "Holy mother of God, Zach, you just embarrassed yourself in front of my friend here. Forget about it, Luigi," he said to the waiter. "I'm sorry, I gotta have the real thing." The waiter nodded and looked inquiringly at the other guy, who said, "Club soda, no fruit." I held up my glass to indicate another. "What's the matter with you, Z?" Nick asked. "You not feeling too good?" "Will you stop talking like that, for Christ's sake? You're a high-ranking employee of the federal government. I'm a taxpayer. Try to show a little class." I'm sorry, it's the place. It brings out the old neighborhood in me. I can't stand it. The higher I go up with the feds, the less local color there is, the less gritty action. I'm turning into a faceless bureaucrat. Maybe you should have been a flatfoot. Then you'd be getting your fill of color and grit. That I would, that I would. Our drinks arrived and Nick took a sip. Ah, that'll clear the sinuses. Speaking of flatfoots, or is it flat feet? I want you to meet my friend here, Detective Kevin Higgins of the Suffolk County Police Department, 1st Precinct. He is assigned, interestingly enough, to narcotics. He has a story that I believe may be of interest to you and which, for the price of this fancy dinner, he might be willing to spill. So why don't we dispense with business and then we can get down to ordering. Detective, I turn the table over to you. Higgins took the little straw out of his club soda and placed it to the side of his glass. He picked up his drink and took a sip. He recentered the glass on the napkin, leaned forward, and placed his elbows on the table. He looked at me with his flat eyes. First, I want to know what your interest is in the Melfi brothers. Nick here was a little sketchy on the details. I've got a DOA, Alex Penworth, formerly in the Melfi's employ as a bartender, I said, easily slipping into the just the relevant facts mode that we spent so many hours sharpening while presenting cases in law school or arguing before the appellate courts. Since I was talking to a detective, I tried to mix it with as much cop speak as I could. According to the detectives who caught the squeal, it's a suicide, but I've looked at the autopsy and crime scene reports and something's hinky. A friend of the Manhattan DA agrees. I've got the DOA's roommate saying he started acting squirrely about a month before he died, and I've got him getting fired by the Melfi brothers at about the same time. Something went down with his unemployment claim. It was denied, and then it went through. I don't know what that has to do with anything, but I do know that the Vic had a blow-up with one of the managers about it, and that there were witnesses. While I was talking, Higgins reached into his pocket and took out a pack of Stimudent toothpicks. He broke one off and started working it between his teeth. I continued. Finally, every time I try to find anything out from the detectives involved, they chew me a new asshole. I'm not trying to screw anything up for anyone, but if these guys, the Melfis, are responsible for this death or are in any way a contributing factor, I'd like to see them go down for it. Higgins pulled the toothpick out of his mouth. How long did this guy work for the brothers? About a year and a half, all told. Uh-huh. And how did he die? He was strangled in his apartment. Then he was hung up. It looked a little like suicide, I guess, but not enough to fool anyone who took a good close look. Tell me about the brothers. What have they been up to? What are their restaurants like? I thought you knew about them. I thought that's why Nick brought you here. Nah, I'm from out in Suffolk County, and they dropped off our radar a couple of years ago. I'll get to that. First, fill me in on what they've been up to in your fair city. So I did, giving him a sketch of what I'd found out in my research online. Then I realized that I'd forgotten my run-in with Sally at Tempo, and I filled him in on that as well. When I finished, he nodded. And your gal Sal, how did you know her? I met her at the station when my friend, Alex's roommate, that's how I first got involved in this thing, when she was first questioned by the cops. And she's in narco? I think that's what she said, yes. And she wouldn't tell you anything about what's going on? No. He nodded again, took out his mangled toothpick and laid it on his cocktail napkin next to his swizzle stick. It looked like a little witch's broom. It sounds like these guys are up to their old tricks, he said. Which are? Laundering drug money. Maybe a little traffic as well, but mostly laundering. How do they do it? They run it through the restaurants. That's what they were doing out on the island? We think so. But back then they were just learning their trade, and they may have been focused more on the traffic and less on the laundry. We're not sure. What we do know is that they picked up a few properties for a song at foreclosures, then quickly turned them into the hotspots that you read about in your research. We don't know if they were a part of the pipeline themselves or if they were just letting it be known that the clubs could be used as retail locations. We do know that whatever they were doing, it was profitable. Very, very profitable. We think eventually they went into the cleaning business and phased out the drugs. You weren't able to shut them down? No. But you tried. He pulled out his pack of stimulants, broke off another one, and started punishing it. Oh, yeah, he said with bitterness. We tried. How? We put a man inside. I ran him. And he wasn't able to find any evidence of traffic. That's why we think that eventually they phased out the retail and focused on the cleaning. They were making a lot? We think so. We know that on the books they were running successful clubs and restaurants in locations that hadn't been able to sustain a profitable going concern since the 50s. But you weren't able to shut them down? No. How come? I don't know how much you know about the money laundering, but it can be really hard to pick up, especially in this situation, because restaurants are by and large a cash business with a very fluid inventory. If our guy on the inside had been able to get enough for a warrant, we could have gotten a hold of their books, and maybe a really thorough audit would have been able to pin them down. As it played out, these guys were very good, and eventually they moved on. We couldn't follow them. Why'd they take off if things were so good? My guy was getting close, or so he said. Then there was a fire of suspicious origin at one of their clubs. Coincidentally, it was the club that was listed as the parent corporation on all their papers, and they claimed that it was where they kept all their records, taxes, payroll, everything. It was all gone. They collected their insurance and moved on. That's when they moved off the island and off our radar. They're a problem for the big city boys now. Couldn't you go after them on the arson or for fraud? How? They were the victims. The clubs weren't overinsured, so we couldn't use that angle. Plus, they were turning a profit. They weren't headed for bankruptcy. All their accounts with their creditors were up to date, so there's no way to allege any motive for arson, much less prove it. The fact that the fire looked like arson isn't enough to point the finger at them. And unless we were going to say that somehow they knew they were the target of an undercover narcotics investigation, there's no evidence of that. I thought about all of this, sucking on the ice from my drink. Did they know that you guys were getting close? Could your guy have tipped them? Jesus, you're a suspicious bastard, aren't you? Of course we looked into that. We did a full audit on him. If he did tip them, we couldn't find anything that would have given him a reason. No money anywhere, nothing. Still, I said, he could be a squirrel saving his acorns for a long, cold winter. He's not. Listen, I said, no one likes to think it. Not about someone he's working with, not about someone he's running. I don't think it. I know it. How? He's dead. He died in the fire. Accidental? That's the way they made it look. Made it look like my guy was drunk and freebasing down near the liquor storage after closing time, screwing around with one of the waitresses who also bought it in the fire. And you know that's not true? Listen, Higgins said, why don't you worry about getting a handle on the Melfis and this murder you're so hepped up about, and let us worry about our local PD. Sorry. Don't worry about it. I'm just telling you, my guy was clean. But it doesn't matter. I said it before and I'll say it again. These guys are smart and they're slick. Somehow they caught on to the investigation. I don't know if something was in the wind and they caught a whiff of it, or if they had other people in the department on the payroll, or somebody was giving somebody else some head down at town hall. There's all kinds of ways information can slip out, but I'd lay bets it wasn't an accident. These guys keep their ears close to the ground and they know how to make the right kinds of friends. And if that's the case, Nick piped in, you need to be careful, Zach. You might be stumbling into some kind of ongoing operation and you don't want to go screwing that up. Higgins nodded. You also don't want the Melfis to think you're fucking around with their business. Maybe you should let the cops do what they do. I'd be happy to if I thought they were doing it. But I don't really give a shit about the drugs. I'm worried about the murder. If someone told me there was a connection and they were going to do something about it, I'd back off. But so far, all they've done is treat me like some naive backwater jerk. I resent that. Well, it's your case and your neck. Anything else you need from me? No, I think that's it. I appreciate your helping me out. I didn't do it for you, he said, setting his second toothpick down next to the first and standing up. I did it for Nick and for my guy. I met his eye and nodded. He nodded back, waved a hand at Nick, said, "Call me," and walked away. "So," Nick said, "was that helpful?" "I think so," I said. "I just want to know why these guys punched Alex's ticket." Nick swirled the ice in the remains of his drink. "It sounds like they got a huge stake to protect. If they're following the same pattern here in the city, then things must be going very well for them, much better than they were on the island. They got 5 very successful restaurants. Those alone must bring in a lot of cash. Add a well-run money laundering operation on top of it, and the amount of money would be huge. Plenty of reason to kill to protect that." But how would Alex be a threat? How would he even know about it? He was just a bartender. They couldn't be smart enough to run that kind of operation and stupid enough to let every waiter, busboy, and bartender in on it. Who knows? What about the unemployment thing you mentioned? What if he got wind of what was going on and he went down there and threatened to expose them? That would explain the turnaround, why they laid down and didn't fight his appeal. "Yeah," I said. "Boy, that would have been stupid of Alex. If that's what I find out this was about, I'm going to be really pissed off. How much could have he gotten from unemployment? $405 a week?" I was asking a rhetorical question. "I know, but that's the maximum you can collect." "See, now how did you know that?" "I don't know. Things get stuck in my brain." $405 a week. That's a pathetic amount to get killed over. People get killed for a lot less. And if you look at it from the Melfi's point of view, he was killed for a lot more. "True," I said. "One other thing that's been bothering me. The cops are so freaked out that I'm asking questions. What if they were using Alex?" "What do you mean?" "What if he was their man on the inside? Maybe Sally was running him?" "Zach," Nick said skeptically, "I don't think the cops are in the business of using private citizens in undercover operations. Not unless Alex was part of it somehow. If he was working for the Melfi brothers, maybe the cops had something on him and they turned him. It's an old scenario. Catch the little fish and use him to bait the hook. Maybe the Melfis found out. That would be reason to kill him." "No, I don't think so." "Why not?" "It doesn't fit with everything I've learned about him. I can't see him getting involved in drugs. This guy seemed very caught up in right and wrong, maybe even a little bit of a crusader." "Like somebody else we know?" "What do you mean?" "You know what I mean. All you're missing is the cape. You didn't even know this guy." "Hey, lay off. As everyone keeps pointing out, it's not as if I'm doing anything better with my time." "Don't get defensive. If I could take an early retirement like you, I'd do it in a New York minute." "Are you kidding? You wouldn't know what to do with all the free time. You'd kill yourself. As opposed to you trying to find someone to do the job for you." "You think?" "Maybe. Poking around in these things might not be the healthiest thing you could do." And that is the end of chapter 21.